guys! So today we're going to talk a little bit about how geography shaped the cultural and economic adaptations of the colony. So I'm not going to make you sit here and listen to Jerry the whole time, but he's going to hang out with us while we talk a little bit about the colonies today. So basically what we're going to do here is as we're looking at the colonies, you'll fill in your graphic organizer. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how geography really allowed the different cultures to shape in the northern, the southern, and the middle colonies today. So first of all, let's see what we're actually talking about when we say northern, middle, or southern colonies, because it might be a little different than you think. So if you see on your paper, there's some boxes where you're supposed to fill in the names of the different colonies, so let's go through them here. So the northern colonies are going to be these ones in green up at the top. So what we have are Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, okay? One thing you will notice is that Massachusetts is twice on here. So what is today Maine was actually part of Massachusetts, and it was cut in half by New Hampshire. So Maine is not one of the original 13 colonies. Don't write Maine down, just write Massachusetts. In terms of the middle colonies, we have New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Okay? And then the southern colonies are Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Now, North and South Carolina were actually originally one colony, but before the 1700s, they were split into two different colonies by the King of England. So that's just kind of where we are right now. There may be a couple that are surprising to you. For example, New York being a middle colony might seem a little strange to you. It seems a little bit like it would be more northern, but it's not. Also, you'll notice that Maryland's technically a southern colony. So it's going to culturally fit in a little bit more with the southern colonies here at the beginning. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to start by talking about the northern or New England colonies. They'll have both names here. So the geography of the north is pretty different than things around here. If you've ever been in Boston in the winter, that's all you need to know about the geography of the north. So of course the first thing is that shorter growing season. Your summer's much shorter. It's not quite as hot as it is down here. That doesn't give plants a lot of time to be able to germinate and seed and be able to harvest before the first frosts are going to come in. So that can make farming a little difficult. The other thing that makes farming difficult in the north is that the soil is pretty rocky, which means that you've got to do a lot of work up front in order to get the soil prepared for farming, and even then you're not going to grow a great harvest. So farming, as you can already see, is going to be really small in terms of the northern economy. The other thing that they do have, so they may not have good soil, they may not have a long growing season, but they do have a lot of harbors, which means that shipping is going to play a big part. You can get in and out of the harbors relatively easily. It's not as dangerous as some of the other harbors might be. So that's going to play an important role in the north. So what farms do exist in the north are going to be what we call subsistence farms or family farms. Basically, their goal is to make the family that is living on them survive. They're not growing enough to sell. They're not growing cash crops to make a living on. These people are just trying to make their way in life, live their life, do what they need to do. And in fact, oftentimes these small family farmers are going to have other jobs above and beyond what their farm is. This is also going to lead to a growth of cities in the north because you don't have a lot of farms. People are not spread out, which means that they can live a little bit closer together. So that's going to play a big role in that. And finally, the biggest industry that's going to develop in the north is fishing and shipbuilding. So this is going to be one that's important for England as well as for the Americas. Remember, the colonies are owned by England. So a lot of the ships that England is going to be using are going to come from the Americas. They can get the lumber from the plentiful trees here, build the ships, and then of course bring them in and out of the harbors. So that's going to play a big role. Now, because there are more cities in the north, what we're going to find is that there are more churches, more schools, businesses, and more democracy. So basically what happens in the north are we have what are called town meetings, where people in the cities will come together to make decisions for their town. So this is like the true Athenian democracy, where all of the men are coming in to make the decisions rather than answering to somebody that doesn't live in their area. So that's what I mean by direct democracy. They're directly changing what's going on in their own city. So just a couple of pictures here. So these top pictures, you can see it's cold, it's snowy, it just looks miserable to be in those pictures. The one on the left is a smaller family farm. You can see that not a lot of fenced-in area here. The house is really small. We're not talking about big plantations in New England. But instead, what you can see in the picture on the right are lots of buildings close together. You can see the church, you can see houses and businesses much closer together. In fact, if you look down at this bottom picture, the church itself is going to play an important part. Remember, New England were mostly religious colonists, and that's going to play a big role in life in New England. Puritan values are very important up there, and that's also going to be where a lot of the town meetings are held, part of the direct democracy. Just a couple pictures here to represent the economy. Like I said, more small businesses, blacksmiths, mills, milliners who are sewers, that sort of thing. Ship making, of course, is a big part, as I said. Something I do want you to know about the North. They did have slaves in New England, especially at first. But the reason it dies out faster in the North is because the slaves aren't needed on farms, right? They're mostly working in homes, working for wealthier families. So slaves are just quite simply unnecessary in the North. They don't need the extra labor. So that's why slavery dies out faster in New England than it does in the South. So we're going to skip the middle colonies for right now and go straight on to the southern colonies and see the big differences here. So first thing that we know about the South is that the summers are long and hot. This gives us plenty of time for growing, for harvesting, so that's going to play a big role. Also, the fertile soil is pretty much ready to go. You don't have to do a lot of prep work to the soil. Things grow easily down here. So the combination of those two things are going to lead to farming becoming a major industry. There are also much fewer harbors in the South, and the ones that do exist are few and far between. There's a good harbor in Charleston, and there's a good harbor in Virginia, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But for the most part, it's hard to get in and out of the harbors that do exist. Think about the coast of North Carolina. You know that it's called the graveyard of the Atlantic because it's rocky, it's hard to get in and out of. And in fact, that becomes a breeding ground for pirates. Pirates like the coast of North Carolina because it is hard to get in and out of, so they can maneuver in and out and hopefully not get caught. Isn't that right, Jerry? So, the cultural adaptations, of course, are going to be much larger farms and plantations. You're going to have these hundreds to thousands of acres of land that are going to be owned by some of the wealthier citizens in the South. And this is going to really allow for the slave population to increase. Now, at first, plantation owners and farmers brought in indentured servants. So to remind you what that is, an indentured servant is someone that you would pay for their passage from England. And they would work for you for 7 to 10 years. And in that 7 to 10 years, they're almost quasi-slaves. They don't get paid. They have to do what you tell them to. They work for you. But at the end of their contract, you give them a small plot of land, a little bit of a monetary bonus, some clothes, and they're on their way, and they get to live on that. But the thing about indentured servants is it's expensive, right? If you're giving away land and money to all of your indentured servants once they're finished, that's going to cost you a lot. Then you got to bring in more indentured servants. So slaves stay with you for life, and you don't have to pay for them. So that's why slavery becomes more popular than indentured servitude. This is also going to lead to more cash crops. So basically the way people make money in the South is by selling the crops that they make. Rather than just eating them all themselves, they will sell them. They're also going to grow crops. Cash crops are also things that you can't eat. So things like tobacco or indigo. Tobacco, obviously, for smoking. Indigo makes a dye for uniforms and things along those lines. So we're going to have a lot more of those kind of crops that you can't live on, but that you can sell and make money on. So what this is going to lead to is fewer cities in the South, fewer churches, fewer schools. Education is a little bit lower in the South. People become more independent because they can't rely on neighbors because their closest neighbor might be 50 or 100 miles away. What this is also going to mean is that democracy is very different. Instead, we have an autocracy in the South. And an autocracy is when a few people kind of make the decisions. So rather than the citizens voting on things, you're going to have a few people, probably the wealthy people, who are making the decisions for you in the South. So just a couple pictures here. This shows you some of the rivers and better harbors that I was talking about. The Chesapeake Bay in Virginia is one. This becomes known as the Tidewater area because people do use that for shipping. So basically crops from the rest of the South would be moved up into the Charleston Harbor or to the Chesapeake Harbor and can be shipped around the world from those ports rather than having to ship them all the way up to the northern colonies. All right, so this just shows you some pictures of some farms down in the South. This first picture on the left here obviously is tobacco, which you've probably seen around if you've been around North Carolina a while. This middle picture is rice. So tobacco can't grow everywhere. South Carolina is one of the places that tobacco has a harder time growing. But instead in South Carolina, it's very wet and marshy, and that's perfect for rice. So rice plantations grow up in parts of South Carolina and Georgia. At the bottom here you can see a working plantation, and then of course at the top a photograph of slaves working in a tobacco or cotton field. The one thing to remember, cotton does not come a major cash crop until much later. Tobacco is king at the beginning of the colonies. Remember that. Tobacco is king, right? Don't forget that. Okay, so in terms of the middle colonies, we're going to see that the middle colonies are really a mixture of the northern and the southern colonies. They're kind of in between. They're in a weird place. The people that live there are a little bit more diverse. We've got immigrants from all over Europe, particularly Germany. There are a lot of Catholics that live in that part of the country. So it's more diverse. There is some slavery that exists here, but it's also diverse in geography. So you've got two kinds of geography in the middle colonies. You've got geography that looks a little bit more like the northern colonies. It's kind of coastal, but you also have the frontier. So this is the beginning of like the westward areas. It's not quite southern plantation, but it's not quite, coastal towns either. This is the wilderness, the Daniel Boone kind of idea. So that's what we're going to see more in the middle colonies. So as you can see, when I say it's a mixture, you've got in parts of the middle colonies, you've got iron and sawmills that are going to be more of the industrial sector, but you've also got smaller farms. They're still pretty big farms, but not as big as they're going to be in the South, but definitely bigger than we have in most of the New England colonies that are also growing cash crops. So that's a combination of the two industries. Then those goods can be easily shipped out of New York's ports. New York has some pretty large harbors. Remember, it is a middle colony. So what we're seeing is that nice combination of the North and the South right here in the middle colonies. The middle colonies also have a milder climate than that of New England. It's not quite as hot as it is in the South either. So there are some good cash crops that grow there. We really have 4 seasons in a lot of these middle colonies here. So you can really see that because of the way that geography is changing the different colonies here, there's going to be a lot of diversity between the North and South. And what that means is that the North and South have different goals. So the North is going to be more about shipping and more about industry and personal business and kind of like working for yourself, whereas the South is going to be more about that plantation mindset. There's going to be a little bit of a slower way of life down there. It's not as busy in the South. It's going to be really focused again on slavery and other things. And this is, of course, going to eventually lead to tension between the two groups because, as you know, you can't have two people that are that different trying to make decisions together. It's going to change a lot of it. So this kind of wraps up the basics that you need to know about the geography of the different colonies and what they are like. So Jerry and I are going to sign off here. We'll see you next time. Bye.